"I can fix your Corvette in exchange for lunch," and the rich man laughed but froze. Richard Johnson was desperate as he watched smoke billowing from under the hood of his yellow Corvette on the shoulder of Interstate 5. He had a decisive meeting in 2 hours that could save his company from a complicated financial situation. That's when a man in worn overalls and a wool cap approached, offering help in exchange for just a lunch. Richard laughed disdainfully, but his laughter died in his throat when he heard that familiar voice whisper, "I still remember when you promised you'd never forget me, Richard." The businessman felt his blood run cold in his veins. 28 years had passed since he last heard that voice. His hands trembled as he adjusted his sunglasses, trying to disguise the recognition shining in his eyes. The man before him had graying hair, deep wrinkles around his eyes, and hands calloused from hard work. But he was unmistakably his older brother, James. I don't know what you're talking about," stammered Richard, his voice faltering for the first time in decades. "My car broke down and I need to get to New York urgently." James smiled sadly, that same protective smile Richard remembered from their childhood in rural Kansas. "Hold on there, little brother. First, let's take a look at what happened to your fancy car." The word "little brother" pierced Richard like a dagger. No one had called him that in nearly 3 decades. He watched James open the hood of the Corvette with the same skill he demonstrated when fixing Richard's broken bicycle in the makeshift workshop in the backyard of the house where they grew up. "Engine overheated. Radiator leak," diagnosed James, wiping his oily hands on an old rag. "Nothing that can't be fixed in about an hour, but our deal still stands, right? A lunch." Richard took out his wallet, his hands still shaking. "Look, I can pay you well for this. $500, $1,000, but I need it to be quick." James's expression changed completely. The smile vanished and his eyes filled with a deep pain that Richard knew well. It was the same pain he saw on his brother's face the day they said goodbye at the Topeka bus station. "I don't want your money, Richard," said James, his voice low but firm. "I never did. I just wanted my brother back." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard stepped back a few paces, pretending to take a non-existent call. In truth, he needed time to process what was happening. How had James arrived there at that exact moment, and why now, just when his life was falling apart? He watched his brother work, noticing how James handled the tools with dexterity, as if every movement was a rehearsed dance. The memories began to return. James teaching him to change the oil of the old motorcycle they used to ride to school. James working overnight at Mr. Anthony's auto shop to get money for Richard's books. "Do you remember the promise you made me?" asked James without looking up from the engine. "At the bus station before you caught the bus to New York." Richard closed his eyes, trying to block the memory, but it came back with full force. He was 17 and had gotten a partial scholarship to Columbia University. James, 3 years older, had been working since he was 14 to help support them both after their parents passed in an accident. "You said you'd come back to get me as soon as you graduated," continued James, now looking directly at Richard. "Said we were going to open our own auto shop, that you'd never abandon me." "Things changed, James," Richard murmured, his voice almost inaudible. Life is more complicated than we imagined." "For you it changed," James retorted, going back to work. "For me it stayed the same, waiting." The silence that followed was broken only by the noise of tools and the sound of cars passing on the interstate. Richard watched his brother work and noticed something that made him swallow hard. On James's wrist was the gold watch that had belonged to their father. The same watch Richard thought he had lost years ago. "Where did you get that?" asked Richard, pointing to the watch. James stopped what he was doing and looked at his own wrist. "Oh, this. I found it among your things that were left in the room in Topeka. You must have forgotten when you moved to New York." "I didn't forget," said Richard, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "I looked for it for weeks." "Is that so?" James raised an eyebrow. "Because I sent you letters for 3 years, telling you I had found it. I never got a reply." The truth hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. He remembered the letters. He remembered seeing them arrive at the shared house where he lived, remembered recognizing his brother's handwriting on the envelope. But at the time, he was so focused on adapting to the new world, on impressing his upper-middle-class classmates, that he decided to cut all ties with the past, including James. "James, Done," interrupted James, closing the hood. "It's working perfectly. Now about that lunch." Richard looked at his brother, and then at the expensive watch on his own wrist. It was a Swiss model that cost more than James made in a year. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. He wore a watch worth a fortune, while James wore their father's simple watch that had sentimental value. "There's a good restaurant about 3 miles from here," said Richard, resigned. "We can go in my car." During the drive, the silence was deafening. Richard drove trying to maintain his composure, but his hands were sweating on the steering wheel. James looked out the window, watching the rural landscape of New York with the calm of someone who had already made peace with life. "How did you know it was my car?" Richard finally asked. "I didn't," replied James. "I just saw a broken-down yellow Corvette and a man in an expensive suit needing help. When you turned around, I could hardly believe it. You've changed a lot, but the eyes are still the same." "You've changed too," said Richard, risking a quick glance at his brother. 28 years change anyone," James agreed, "but some things never change." The restaurant Richard had chosen was one of those expensive roadside places, frequented by businessmen traveling between New York and the countryside. As soon as they entered, Richard noticed the waiter's disdainful looks directed at James, who seemed out of place with his simple clothes in the midst of the sophisticated environment. "Table for 2, Richard told the maitre d', trying to keep his voice steady. "Certainly, Mr. Johnson," replied the maitre d', who obviously recognized Richard. "Table 12, please." As they walked to the table, Richard noticed how James observed everything with curiosity, showing no embarrassment or envy. It was as if he was genuinely interested in getting to know that different world without judgment. "Nice place," James commented, sitting down. "You must come here often." "Sometimes," Richard lied. In fact, it was the first time he had set foot in that restaurant, but he didn't want to seem pretentious. The waiter approached with the menu and directed all questions only to Richard, completely ignoring James. When James ordered a beer, the waiter hesitated, as if doubting he could pay. "2 beers, Richard said firmly, staring at the waiter until he walked away. "You didn't have to do that," said James. "I'm used to it." "Used to what?" "To the way people look at me when I'm in places like this. It doesn't bother me anymore." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. When he was a child, James always defended him from bullies at school, always protected him from humiliating situations. Now it was Richard who should be protecting James, but he had been the one who abandoned him. "James, about the letters, don't forget that," James interrupted, taking a sip of his beer. "I didn't come here to demand anything. In fact, I didn't even know I'd run into you. It was just fate." "Fate?" "I work as a mechanic at a shop in San Diego. My boss sent me to pick up some parts in New York. I was on my way back when I saw your car stopped. I thought, what a coincidence. A yellow Corvette, just like the one Richard always dreamed of having." Richard almost choked on his beer. James remembered his dream. He himself had forgotten that, as a teenager, he was always flipping through imported car magazines, dreaming specifically of a yellow Corvette. "You bought the car you always wanted," James continued, smiling. "I'm happy for you." The guilt Richard had carried for years intensified. How could James be happy for him after everything? How could he speak so naturally about dreams Richard had achieved at the cost of abandoning his brother? "And you?" asked Richard, forcing himself to ask the question he feared. "Did you achieve any dreams?" James chuckled softly, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. "My dreams were simpler. I wanted to have a family, work at what I enjoy, have peace. I achieved 2 out of 3. And the third? Peace. Well, that one's still a work in progress." The waiter came back to take their order. Richard chose the most expensive dish on the menu out of habit, while James just ordered a simple daily special. When the waiter walked away again, James pulled a small worn photo from his pocket. "Look at this," he said, handing the photo to Richard. It was a picture of the 2 of them as children, hugging in the backyard of the house where they grew up. Richard was about 8. James must have been 11. Both were smiling at the camera with that genuine childhood happiness. Richard remembered that day. They had managed to fix an old radio they found in the trash together. "Where did you get this?" asked Richard, his voice choked. "I've always carried it with me. It's my favorite picture. That day, you said that when we grew up, we would work together fixing things. You were going to handle the business side, and I the technical part." Richard looked at the photo and then at James's calloused hands. He thought of his own soft hands, which hadn't fixed anything in decades, only signed contracts and shook other business owners' hands. "James, Richard began but was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. It was Jennifer, his personal assistant. "Mr. Johnson, where are you? The meeting starts in 40 minutes, and the investors are already arriving." Richard looked at James, who was drinking his beer calmly, waiting. "Jennifer, cancel the meeting. Tell them I had a family emergency." "But sir, it's the meeting of the year. There are $50 million at stake." "Cancel it," said Richard, hanging up the phone. James watched him curiously. "Family emergency?" "Yeah, something like that." When the food arrived, James ate with genuine pleasure, praising each dish as if it were the first time he had tasted something so delicious. Richard barely touched his food, too disturbed by the emotions surfacing. "Tell me about your life," said Richard. "Are you married? Do you have children?" James's face lit up. "I have a son, Matthew. He's 22, in his last year of mechanical engineering at UCLA. "Engineering?" Richard was surprised. "How did you pay for it?" "Full scholarship. The boy was always smart, just like you were. He works at a shop during the day and studies at night. Stubborn, just like his uncle," said James, smiling. Richard realized James had spoken about him to his son. "Does he know about me?" "I've told him about you," James confirmed. "How could I not talk about the brother I loved most in my life?" James's words were like knives in Richard's heart. "James, I'm so sorry. I should have..." "Should have what?" "Stayed poor with me." James shook his head. "You did what you had to do. You grew up, studied, made something of yourself. I'm proud of you." "Proud?" Richard almost shouted. "James, I abandoned you. I left you behind as if you didn't exist." "So what?" James looked at his brother with serenity. "Do you think a brother stops loving the other just because life separates them? Do you think I stopped rooting for you just because you weren't around?" Richard couldn't understand. How could James be so generous, so understanding? All these years, Richard had built a version of the story where he was the victim of circumstances, where he had no choice. But faced with James's inexplicable kindness, all his justifications crumbled. "There's something I need to tell you," said James, nervously fiddling with the napkin. "The auto shop where I work is closing at the end of the month. The owner is selling the land to a construction company." "And you? What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. At 52, it's not easy to start over, but I always figure something out." Richard looked at his brother and wondered how many times James had figured something out over all these years, how many problems he had faced alone, how many difficulties he had overcome without anyone to help. "James, I can help. I have resources, I have contacts. I don't want your charity, Richard," said James, but his voice held no anger, only firmness. "You've already given me more than you realize." "What do you mean?" James smiled and pulled a yellowed newspaper clipping from his overalls pocket. It was an article about Richard's company, published a few years earlier when he had been voted Businessman of the Year in New York. "I cut out every news story about you, I find. I have a whole folder full at home. When I feel sad, I read about your achievements and I feel proud." Richard took the clipping with trembling hands. The photo showed him smiling next to a sign for his company. He looked happy, but Richard remembered how empty he felt that day despite the apparent success. "James, you don't understand. I'm not the man I appear to be in that photo. My company is going bankrupt. My marriage ended 2 years ago. I don't have any real friends, just business partners looking out for themselves." "And? What do you mean, and?" "Richard, do you think success in life is not having any problems?" James laughed softly. "Success is keeping on fighting, even when everything seems lost. And you're here still fighting." Richard looked at his brother with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. How could James see light where he only saw darkness? "There's something else," said James, hesitating. "About our parents' accident, I need to tell you the truth." Richard's fork fell onto his plate with a metallic clatter. "What truth?" "They were on their way to pick you up from school when it happened. Remember you were grounded and had to stay late?" Richard nodded slowly. He was 15 and had gotten into a fight with a classmate. As punishment, he had to clean the classroom after school. "I asked them to wait. I said I could go pick you up on my bike, but they wanted to surprise you. They had bought that scientific calculator you wanted." Tears began to stream down Richard's face. He remembered the calculator. It was wrapped up on the back seat of the car when the ambulance arrived. "Why did you never tell me this?" "Because you already carried too much guilt. You thought if you hadn't been grounded, they would still be alive. I didn't want you to carry this too." Richard broke down. All the tears he had held back for decades came out at once. James calmly stood up, walked around the table and hugged his brother like he did when they were kids. "Easy there, little brother. It's all right now." The other restaurant customers looked on curiously, but James didn't mind. They just held Richard while he cried years of repressed pain. When Richard finally calmed down, James returned to his seat and kept eating as if nothing had happened. This naturalness with emotion was something Richard had lost at some point in life. "How do you do that?" asked Richard, drying his eyes. "Do what?" "Keep being you. After everything you've been through, you're still the same good person you always were." James thought for a moment before answering. "You know what I've learned all these years? That we can choose how to react to the things that happen to us. I could have become bitter, angry at you, angry at life, but I chose to keep believing that people do the best they can with what they have at the time." "I didn't do the best I could," admitted Richard. "I did what was easiest for me. And that's okay. You were a scared boy in a big city, trying to survive. I understand that." Richard looked at his brother and realized something that shocked him. James had truly forgiven everything. It wasn't an act or an attempt to be polite. It was genuine forgiveness, the kind Richard had never experienced in his business circles. "James, can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure. Are you happy?" James smiled, and for the first time Richard saw joy wrinkles around his brother's eyes. "You know what happiness is for me? It's waking up every morning knowing I'll do something I enjoy, that I'll help someone with my work. It's coming home and seeing my son studying. It's chatting with the neighbors at the local bakery. It's that simple." Richard thought about his own routine. Waking up in an empty 3,000 square foot apartment, having coffee alone while reading financial reports, spending the day in meetings with people who only talked to him out of self-interest. When was the last time he had felt the simple happiness James described? "And you?" asked James. "Are you happy?" Richard took a long time to answer. "I thought I was. I have money, recognition, success, but looking at you now I realize I don't even know what real happiness is anymore. Money doesn't bring happiness, but it's not the devil some make it out to be either," said James wisely. "The problem is when we trade important things for money, when we forget what really matters." "And what really matters?" "The people we love, the moments we share with them, the memories we create together." Richard thought about the last Christmases he had spent alone. Even though he had money to travel anywhere in the world, he thought about the birthdays nobody remembered, the professional successes he had no one to celebrate with. "James, I need to tell you something too. My company is in serious trouble. The meeting I cancelled today was my last chance to get an investor." "What kind of company?" "Technology. We develop business management software. It was prosperous until a few years ago, but the competition got tough and I made some management mistakes." James nodded, listening attentively. "And what will you do?" "I don't know. Maybe declare bankruptcy. Maybe sell everything and start over." "Starting over isn't the end of the world," said James. "I've done it a few times." "A few times?" "The first auto shop where I worked closed when I was 25. The second one when I was 32. The third one lasted 8 years, but the owner passed away and the family sold it. Now this one will close too." Richard was stunned. And you never gave up? Gave up on what? On working? On living? I don't understand. This was what Richard most admired about James, his ability to keep moving forward, to find hope even in the most difficult situations. It was the opposite of Richard, who at the first sign of serious difficulty already thought about giving up. You know what I've learned through all these changes, continued James, that what matters isn't where you work, but how you work. I always gave my best in every auto shop, always treated every customer like they were family. That's why I was never unemployed for long. Richard thought about how he treated his employees. They weren't family, they were human resources. Numbers on spreadsheets, cost to be optimized. Matthew will graduate at the end of the year, said James, changing the subject. He's interning at a multinational company. Maybe he'll get to stay there. You must be proud. Very, but also worried. Why? I'm afraid he'll make the same mistakes you made. The words hit Richard hard. What mistakes? Thinking professional success is more important than family. Forgetting where you came from. Trading people for things. Richard swallowed hard. That was exactly what he had done. How can I fix this? I don't know if you can, said James honestly, but you can try not to make the same mistakes from now on. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard looked around the restaurant and suddenly felt suffocated. All those well-dressed people talking about business and money seemed to be living empty lives like his. James, with his simple clothes and grease-stained hands, seemed to be the only real person in that artificial environment. Want to get out of here? Asked Richard impulsively. Sure. Where to? I don't know. Anywhere but here. They paid the bill and left. In the parking lot, Richard hesitated before getting in the car. James, can I ask you a favor? Of course. Can you drive? I haven't felt safe driving for a while. James took the keys without question. It felt strange to be in the passenger seat of his own car, but Richard felt safer with James driving. He had always felt safe with his older brother. Where are we going? Asked James. San Diego, I want to see where you live. James looked at his brother in surprise. Are you sure? It's very different from what you're used to. I'm sure. During the drive back to San Diego, the brothers talked about childhood memories. Richard was surprised to discover how much he had forgotten and how James remembered everything with vivid detail. Remember Mr. Joseph? Asked James. The mechanic who lived on the corner. Exactly. He's the one who taught me everything about cars. He always said you had potential in that area too, but that you'd probably follow a different path. He was right. He was, and that's okay. Everyone has their own path. The important thing is not to forget where you came from. When they arrived in San Diego, James drove to a simple neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The houses were small but well kept, with small front gardens and clothes drying on the line. It was a completely different world from the gated community where Richard lived. This is it, said James, stopping in front of a single-story house with a green iron gate. Richard got out of the car and looked around. Children played in the street. Neighbors chatted on the sidewalks. There was life there, community, something Richard hadn't experienced for years in his luxury condominium, where nobody spoke to anyone. James, you're home early today, said an elderly lady from the gate next door. Hi, Mrs. Wilson, this is my brother, Richard. The famous Richard? The lady's eyes lit up. James talks about you all the time. Come in, both of you. Richard was surprised. Mrs. Wilson treated them like they were family, insisting they try the cake she had just made. In the simple kitchen of James's house, Richard felt more welcomed than at all the business dinners of the past few years. Dad, a young voice called from the living room. You're home early. A tall, slender young man appeared in the kitchen. He had James's intelligent eyes and a warm smile that reminded Richard of his own youth. Matthew, this is your uncle Richard, said James. Matthew extended his hand with a huge smile. Finally, Dad talks so much about you that I feel like we already know each other. Richard shook his nephew's hand, moved. James told me you're graduating in engineering. Yes, sir, At the end of the year, I'm interning at an auto parts company. I love the field. He's thinking of opening his own auto shop after graduating, said James proudly. He wants to modernize the industry, bring technology to customer service. Richard looked at Matthew and saw in him the same determination he had had in his youth. But unlike Richard, Matthew didn't seem willing to abandon his father to achieve his goals. And you, Uncle? Dad always tells stories about how smart you were in school. It must have been hard leaving Kansas alone to study in New York. Matthew's innocent question opened a wound Richard thought had healed. It was, "But your father paid a high price for my education." "What price?" asked Matthew, confused. James and Richard exchanged glances. It was clear James had never told his son about the sacrifices he had made. "Your father gave up his own studies to send me to university," said Richard. "He worked day and night to pay my tuition, my lodging, my books." Matthew looked at his father with renewed admiration. "Dad, you never told me that." "It wasn't important," said James, embarrassed. "What mattered was giving your uncle an opportunity." "It was important," said Richard, looking directly at James, "and I never thanked you properly." That night, Richard stayed for dinner at James's simple home. Matthew cooked a pasta with homemade tomato sauce that was delicious. During the meal, Richard observed the dynamic between father and son. They talked about everything, supported each other, showed affection without embarrassment. It was everything Richard hadn't had with his own adoptive father, nor managed to build in his later relationships. The family James had created was small, but it was real. "Uncle, can I ask you something?" said Matthew after dinner. "Of course." "Why did you two go so long without seeing each other?" Richard looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Because I was a fool, Matthew. I thought that to be successful I had to forget my past. I thought a poor family was a burden that would hold me back. And now I know I was wrong. Family isn't a burden, it's strength. Your father taught me that today." When it was time for Richard to leave, James walked him to the car. The yellow Corvette seemed out of place on that simple street, like a symbol of everything that had separated the two brothers. "James, about the auto shop you're going to close," began Richard. "Richard, I already said I don't want charity." "It's not charity, it's business." Richard took a deep breath. "My company needs a partner auto shop for fleet vehicle maintenance. How about if I help you open your own auto shop and you become my official supplier?" James narrowed his eyes. "You're making this up to help me." "I'm not. It's true. I really need this service. I'm paying a fortune to a company in New York to maintain the company cars. And you'd trust me to take care of your vehicles?" "James, I'd trust you with my life." For a moment, James seemed ready to cry, but he quickly composed himself. "It would have to be a real partnership. Me handling the technical part, you the administrative part, just like you always said it would be. And Matthew? Could he join when he graduates?" "That would be perfect. He can bring the technological innovations you mentioned." James extended his hand. "Then we have a deal." Richard shook his brother's hand and felt more complete than he had in decades. In the days that followed, Richard cancelled important commitments to spend time with James, planning the new auto shop. They visited properties, talked with suppliers, and drew up business plans. It was as if the 28 years of separation had never existed. But not everything was settled. On the third night, Richard received a call from Jennifer, informing him that the investors were withdrawing their interest in his company due to the abrupt cancellation of the meeting. "I lost everything," Richard told James the next morning. "I won't even have money to help you with the auto shop." "So what?" said James, surprising Richard once again. "We'll figure it out." "What do you mean, figure it out?" "Richard, have you forgotten what it's like to start from scratch?" "Our parents started from scratch. I started from scratch several times. You started from scratch when you went to New York. Just do it again." The simplicity of James's logic was both comforting and frightening. Richard had grown accustomed to seeing problems as insurmountable, but James saw only challenges to be overcome. "I have an idea," said Matthew, who had just arrived from college. "What if you started small? Dad has the tools and the know-how. Uncle has management experience. You could start with simple services and gradually grow." "Where?" asked Richard. "I don't have money to rent a place anymore." "In the garage here at home," suggested James. At least at first. Richard looked at the small garage and wondered how he had reached the point of considering starting a business in such a modest space. But something inside him was excited about the idea. It had been decades since he had felt that energy of starting something new. "Let's try," said Richard. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just getting started. Now, continuing. During the following weeks, Richard temporarily moved to a hotel in San Diego to be closer to James. Every day the two worked together organizing the garage, buying second-hand tools, and creating a simple service system. Richard discovered he still remembered some things about mechanics that James had taught him when they were teenagers. His soft hands became calloused again, and he felt a physical satisfaction in the work that he hadn't experienced in years. The first customer was Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor, who needed an oil change for her old car. She paid with a homemade lunch and referred other neighbors. Within 2 weeks, the small auto shop already had a regular clientele from the neighborhood. "You know what impresses me the most?" Richard told James one afternoon as they cleaned the tools. "What?" "How people here trust you. They leave their car keys and walk away knowing you'll do honest work. That's how it works here in the neighborhood. Everyone knows each other. Everyone helps each other." Richard thought about how different it was in his corporate world, where every contract had dozens of pages of clauses to protect against possible betrayals. "I can't remember the last time someone trusted me like that." "Maybe because you didn't give them reasons to trust," said James without malice, just stating a fact. It was true. Richard had built his career by being clever, finding legal loopholes, making deals that benefited him more than his partners. He had never openly betrayed anyone, but he had never been genuinely trustworthy either. "James, can I confess something to you?" "Of course. All these years, I pretended I had forgotten you. But I couldn't. Whenever I closed an important deal, I thought, I wish James could see this. When I bought my first house, I thought, James would like the workshop in the garage. It was as if part of me was always waiting to meet you again." James stopped cleaning the wrench and looked at Richard. "And why didn't you come looking for me?" "Shame. Fear. I thought you hated me." "I never hated you, Richard. I was hurt, yes, especially in the first few years. But hate is a feeling that hurts the one who feels it more than the one who receives it." Richard understood at that moment something fundamental about James. He had learned to forgive not out of excessive kindness, but out of wisdom. He knew that holding a grudge would only poison his own life. "There's something else I need to tell you," said James, hesitating. "What?" "Remember the Johnson family that helped you in New York? Who took you into their home during your first months of college?" Richard nodded. The Johnsons were a wealthy family he had met through church contacts in Kansas. They treated him like an adopted son, introducing him to New York society, teaching him how to behave in elite circles. "Mr. Johnson came to see me a few times," said James. "He wanted me to stop writing you letters, said you needed to focus on the future and that I was being an obstacle." Richard felt the world spin. "He said that?" "He did, and he offered me money to disappear from your life permanently." "And you?" "I told him to go to hell. Said my brother made his own choices, and if he didn't want contact with me anymore, he would be the one to tell me himself." Richard vaguely remembered a conversation with Mr. Johnson about cutting ties with the past to focus on the future. At the time, still young and impressionable, he accepted the advice without question. Now he realized how he had been manipulated. "Why did you never tell me this before?" "Because it didn't matter. What mattered was that you stopped answering my letters. I thought you had made your decision." Richard sat on the garage floor, leaning against the wall. "James, I received your letters, all of them. I just stopped reading after the third one. I thought it would be easier to forget you if I stopped getting news." "Easier for who?" "For me. Always for me." James sat next to his brother. "Richard, you weren't the only one who was suffering. I was too. But I chose to suffer in the hope that one day we would meet again, not in forgetting. How can you be so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. Too stubborn to give up on the people I love." That night, Richard slept on James's living room sofa. He couldn't sleep a wink. thinking about all the decisions he had made based on what other people said was best for him. How many opportunities for happiness had he lost by following advice from those who didn't truly know his values? The next morning, he found James already working in the garage, fixing a customer's car. "Good morning, sleepyhead," James joked. "Good morning. James, I need to tell you something about my financial situation. It's worse than I admitted yesterday." James stopped working and paid attention. "It's not just the company that's doing poorly. I made some bad investments in recent years. Trying to recover lost money, I ended up losing more. I'm practically bankrupt." "How much do you owe?" Richard took a deep breath. $3 million. James whistled softly. "That's a heck of a lot of money." "James, I understand if you want to give up on the partnership. I can't risk you—" "Stop that," interrupted James. "You think I'm going to abandon you again? That I'm going to let my brother sink alone?" "But James, it's a lot of money. Partnering with me could harm you legally." "Richard, listen carefully. I've faced much worse than money problems, and always alone. Now we have each other. We'll figure it out together." The determination in James's voice was contagious. Richard felt protected, like when he was a child, and James fought the bigger boys who tried to intimidate them. "There's one thing that could help us," said Matthew, who had arrived from college. "The entrepreneurship professor said that small specialized businesses are growing a lot. People want personalized service. They don't want to be just numbers anymore." "That makes sense," agreed Richard. "In my sector, small tech companies are gaining clients from the big ones precisely because of this." "So we can do the same thing in the automotive field," said James. "Differentiated service, close relationship with customers, quality above all." They spent the night planning. Richard applied all his management knowledge to create a viable business model, while James contributed with his technical experience and knowledge of the local market. Matthew brought innovative ideas about how to use simple technology to improve service. "I have a plan," said Richard the next morning. "I'll sell my apartment, my car, and everything I have of value. With that money, we pay part of the debts and use the rest to set up the auto shop." "Richard, are you sure?" asked James. "You'll be left with nothing." "I won't be left with nothing. I'll have you guys." Richard's decision to sell everything shocked his former business colleagues. Some tried to dissuade him, saying he was making a mistake. Others simply drifted away, proving that their friendships were based on status and money. The only one who was positively surprised was his accountant, an honest man named Charles who had worked with Richard for 15 years. "Mr. Johnson, may I give my opinion?" asked Charles. "Of course. In all these years, I've never seen you so determined and happy. I know it might seem crazy, but I think you're doing the right thing." Charles offered to help with the legal aspects of the new company without charging fees until the business was established. "I believe in your project," he said, "and mostly I believe in the change I see in you." While Richard organized the sale of his assets, James worked hard to keep the small garage auto shop running. Every customer served was an opportunity to prove they could offer something different: personalized attention, fair prices, and exceptional quality. Mrs. Thompson, a neighborhood widow, became their biggest supporter. "These boys are honest," she would say to anyone who would listen. James never charged a penny more than agreed, and his brother, who's a famous businessman, is here working in overalls just like a regular worker. They're good people. The community's approval meant more to Richard than any business award he had ever received. For the first time, he felt he was building something based on genuine values, not just profit. One day, while working together changing the oil of Mr. Joseph's car, grandson of the old mechanic who had taught James, Richard made a disturbing discovery. "James, look at this," he said, showing a document he found in his brother's newspaper clippings folder. It was a copy of their parents' will, which Richard had never seen. According to the document, the house where they grew up and a small rural property should have been divided equally between the two brothers. "Why did I never receive my share of the inheritance?" asked Richard. James sighed heavily. "Because I sold everything to pay for your studies. The house, the property, even our mother's jewelry." Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "James, you sold everything. You needed money to support yourself in New York. The university scholarship only covered part of the costs. I thought that when you graduated and got a good job, we could buy another house. Why did you never tell me? Because I knew you would come running back here if you found out, and I couldn't let you give up on your dreams because of me." Richard was stunned. James had literally sacrificed everything, his own studies, the family home, his future, to ensure that Richard could have a chance at success. And in return, Richard had abandoned him. "James, I don't deserve you as a brother." "Nobody deserves family, Richard. We're given family. Then we choose what to do with it." That night, Richard couldn't sleep again. He stayed in James's living room looking at the photos on the shelf. There were dozens of them. James at different stages of life, Matthew growing up, neighborhood friends, work colleagues. But in everyone there was an empty chair next to James, as if he was always waiting for someone. Richard understood that chair had always been his. The next morning, he arrived at the garage determined. "James, let's register the company today." "Today, but we haven't yet." "Today. And I'm selling my Corvette too." "Why? That car is your dream come true." "No, James, my dream come true is being here working with you. The car is just an object." They went to the notary and registered Johnson Brothers Auto Shop. Richard insisted that James be the majority partner, since he would be the one who truly understood the business. James only agreed on the condition that they be equal partners in everything. "We're brothers," said James. "Brother doesn't take advantage of brother." When they returned home with the company documents, they found Matthew euphoric. "Dad, Uncle, I have news." "What is it?" asked James. "Remember that project I presented in college? The app for managing auto shops? My professor said it has real commercial potential." Richard looked interested. During the last few weeks, he had observed Matthew working on a college project that seemed interesting, but he hadn't paid enough attention. "How does it work?" he asked. Matthew excitedly explained. The app allowed small auto shops to offer online services similar to big chains: scheduling, service tracking, transparent estimates, vehicle history. "It's perfect," exclaimed Richard. "We can be the first auto shop in San Diego to offer this kind of service." "But it'll take a few months to fully develop," said Matthew. "We have time," said James. "We're not going to grow overnight anyway." Richard admitted to himself that for the first time in years, he was excited about a project. Not for the money it could bring, but for the opportunity to build something genuine with the people he loved most. In the following months, the small auto shop grew gradually. Richard applied his marketing skills to promote the business, but differently, focusing on service quality, honest estimates, and personal relationships with each customer. James proved to be not just an excellent mechanic, but a true car psychologist. He could diagnose problems that other professionals couldn't identify and explained everything to customers clearly and honestly. "Mr. Johnson, you're an angel," said Mrs. Rose, an elderly customer who brought her old car in for a checkup. "My grandson wanted me to buy a new car, but you showed me this one still has plenty of life left." "A well-cared-for car lasts a lifetime, Mrs. Rose," said James, smiling. "Just like good people." Richard watched these interactions and learned something new every day. James didn't see customers as a source of income, but as people with stories, worries, and dreams. He treated every vehicle as if it were his own, with care and respect. One day, a different customer arrived, a young businessman from New York with a luxury car that had broken down on the highway. He entered the auto shop with a superior air, clearly distrusting a neighborhood shop's ability to handle his imported vehicle. "Do you understand German cars?" he asked arrogantly. Richard was about to respond defensively, but James stepped forward. "We understand cars, young man. German, Japanese, domestic. An engine is an engine. What matters is treating it with respect." The customer laughed disdainfully, exactly as Richard had laughed at James weeks before. "Look, I don't mean to offend, but I'm used to specialized auto shops. Maybe I should just call the tow truck." "Feel free," James said calmly. "But if you change your mind, we'll be here." Richard watched the scene and saw himself in the past. How many times had he treated ordinary people with the same disdain? How many times had he judged competence by appearance? To the arrogant customer's surprise, James diagnosed the problem in 5 minutes, something the specialized shop in New York hadn't been able to identify in 3 attempts. "It's just a faulty sensor," James explained patiently. "A simple thing that causes complicated symptoms. Just like people, sometimes the problem is small, but if you don't take care of it properly, it becomes a big thing." The young businessman was embarrassed by his own arrogance. When he went to pay for the service, he tried to leave an excessive tip, clearly feeling guilty. "No need for that," said James, politely refusing. "We did our job, you pay the fair price. Nobody owes anyone favors." After the customer left, Richard commented, "You were very polite with him. I would have told him to find another auto shop." "He reminded me of someone," said James, smiling mysteriously. "Who?" "You a few weeks ago." Richard laughed genuinely for the first time in a long while. "Touché." The auto shop continued growing, and with it the relationship between the brothers strengthened. They developed a perfect working dynamic. James handled the technical side with his deep knowledge and experience. Richard managed finances and customer service with his business skills, and Matthew, who had started working part-time at the shop, brought innovations and fresh ideas. But not everything was roses. Richard's debts continued to be a shadow over the shop's future. Even with the business growing, the amounts were very small compared to what he owed. One morning, Richard received a call that would change everything. It was from an old client of his tech company, a businessman in the food industry named Frank. "Richard, I heard you're starting a new business. I need to talk to you about an opportunity." Frank explained that his distribution company was looking for an auto shop to handle maintenance for their truck fleet. There were over 100 vehicles that needed regular service. "It's a big contract, Richard. It might be exactly what you need to get back on your feet." Richard felt excitement growing, but also concern. "Frank, our shop is still small. I'm not sure we have the capacity for a contract this size. That's why I'm offering it. I trust you, and I'd rather work with people I know than with those big shops that treat customers like numbers." Richard hung up and ran to tell James the news. "James, this could be our salvation." James listened to the explanation carefully, but his expression was cautious. "Richard, are you sure we can handle this? With the money from this contract, we can rent a bigger warehouse, hire more employees, buy better equipment." "Hold on," said James. "We can't grow faster than our capacity. What if we can't deliver the promised quality?" It was a valid concern. Richard, excited about the possibility of quickly solving his financial problems, wanted to accept the contract immediately. But James, more experienced in dealing with customers, knew that promising more than you can deliver was a recipe for disaster. "What do you suggest?" asked Richard. "Let's visit his company first, see what kind of maintenance the trucks need, what deadlines he expects, what structure we would need to have. Then we decide if it's feasible." Richard agreed, but inside he was anxious. This contract could solve all his problems at once, or it could destroy the small business they had been building with such care. The following week, the three visited the yard of Frank's company in New York. Richard was impressed by the scale of the operation. Dozens of trucks, employees everywhere, a structure that ran like clockwork. "Impressive," commented Matthew. "It's like a small town." Frank personally received them and showed them the fleet. "Currently, we outsource maintenance, but the service is terrible. It takes weeks to get an appointment, the mechanics don't explain anything, and I suspect they charge for services they don't perform." James examined some of the trucks and took careful notes. Richard noticed that his brother was taking the opportunity seriously, but with the caution he always showed. "Frank, can I be direct?" said James. "Of course. Your fleet is poorly maintained. Several problems that could have been avoided with regular preventive maintenance. It will take work to get everything in order. That's exactly why I want an auto shop that understands the subject and cares about long-term results." "And you understand we're a small business? That it will take time to service a fleet of this size?" Frank smiled. "James, may I call you James? I've been in logistics for 20 years. I know quality when I see it. In 15 minutes watching you examine these trucks, I learned more about preventive maintenance than in years of dealing with other auto shops." Richard felt proud of his brother. James wasn't trying to impress or sell anything. He was just being honest about capabilities and limitations, and that was impressing Frank more than any sales pitch. "What would be the timeline for you to handle our full demand?" asked Frank. James and Richard exchanged glances. 6 months, said James after a moment, "with the right structure and the proper team." "Perfect. We can start with a 3-month trial contract. If it works out, we expand." Richard wanted to shout with joy, but he controlled himself. "What are the terms?" Frank detailed a proposal that was even better than Richard had imagined. The payment would be enough to pay off their personal debts and still have some left to properly expand the auto shop. On the way back to San Diego, the three were euphoric. "We did it," celebrated Matthew. "We'll be able to rent a real warehouse." "Easy, son," said James. "Now comes the hard part. We have to prove we deserve Frank's trust." Richard agreed, but inside he was calculating possibilities. With the stable income from this contract, he could pay off the debts in 2 years. He could even buy a house in the same neighborhood as James. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed promising. But as James always said, life rarely follows the plans we make. The following week, while they were looking for warehouses to rent, they received an unexpected visit at the garage. It was an elegant woman, around 60 years old, driving a black sedan. Richard recognized her immediately. It was Elizabeth Johnson, wife of the late Mr. Johnson, who had taken him in New York. "Richard, is it really you?" she asked, getting out of the car. "Mrs. Johnson." Richard tried to hide his nervousness. How did you know I was here?" "Frank Davis told me he hired a new auto shop and mentioned your name. I came to check if it was really you." James watched the conversation with interest, immediately sensing the tension in the air. "Richard, aren't you going to introduce your friend?" "Oh yes. Mrs. Johnson, this is my brother James." Elizabeth looked at James with an expression hard to decipher. "Your brother? I thought you had no family." "I do," said Richard, unable to hide the irony in his voice. "I always had family. I just pretended I didn't." "May I speak with you in private?" asked Elizabeth, clearly uncomfortable with James's presence. Richard looked at his brother, who nodded discreetly. They stepped a few meters away from the garage. "Richard, I need you to understand something," said Elizabeth, her voice low but urgent. "My husband meant well when he advised you to leave the past behind. He genuinely believed it was better for you." "And you? What do you believe?" Elizabeth hesitated. "I believe we all make mistakes trying to protect the people we love. My husband loved you like a son. Perhaps he went overboard with the protection." "Went overboard?" Richard struggled to keep his voice controlled. "Mrs. Johnson, with all due respect, he convinced me to abandon my brother. James sold everything we had to pay for my studies, and I abandoned him because your husband said it was better for me." "I know," said Elizabeth, looking at the ground, "and I regret not intervening at the time. I knew James. He wrote such beautiful letters, spoke of you with so much love. I told my husband he was wrong, but he wouldn't listen to me." Richard was surprised. "You knew James. He came to our house 3 times, always polite, always respectful. He just wanted to know how you were, if you needed anything. My husband wouldn't let him in, but I talked to him at the gate." "And why did you never tell me?" "Because my husband said it would be better for you to forget the past completely, that it would be less painful for you." Richard looked in the direction of James, who was explaining something to Matthew, gesturing animatedly. "Less painful for whom, Mrs. Johnson?" "You are right," she admitted. "It was less painful for us, who didn't have to deal with your homesickness. But I know it was more painful for you and James." "Why are you telling me this now?" Elizabeth sighed. "Because I have cancer, Richard. And when you see yourself near the end, you want to fix the mistakes you've made." Richard felt a mix of sadness and anger. "I'm sorry about the illness, Mrs. Johnson, but I can't pretend everything is okay. I'm not asking for forgiveness to feel better," she said. "I'm asking because you deserve to know the truth, and because your brother deserves an apology he never received." Richard looked again at James. "Do you want to talk to him? If he'll let me." They returned to the garage. Richard quickly explained the situation to James, who listened silently, showing no anger or resentment. "James," said Elizabeth, approaching, "I came to apologize for my husband's mistakes and for my own." James studied her for a moment before answering. "You have nothing to apologize to me for. You took good care of my brother when he needed it. That's what matters. But we sabotaged your relationship." "No one sabotages a relationship that's truly strong," said James wisely. "If it was meant to be different, it would have been different. Things happened the way they had to happen." Elizabeth began to cry. "How can you be so generous after everything?" "Because holding on to anger only hurts the one who holds it. I learned that a long time ago." Richard watched the interaction and understood something profound about his brother. James had truly learned to forgive for real, not just for show. It was an inner strength that Richard was only beginning to understand. "Is there anything I can do to make it up?" asked Elizabeth. "You can," said James. "You can keep being a good mother to Richard. Because even with all the mistakes, you are the only family he had all these years." James's generosity left both Richard and Elizabeth speechless. Instead of using the situation to humiliate those who had wronged him, James chose to build bridges. Elizabeth said goodbye with the promise to return soon for a longer visit. When she left, Richard looked at his brother with renewed admiration. "How do you manage to forgive everyone?" "I don't forgive everyone, Richard. I forgive those who deserve forgiveness, and those who don't, well, I just ignore those people." "And how do you know who deserves forgiveness?" "It's simple. Those who truly regret, who try to fix what they did wrong, who show through actions that they've changed, they deserve forgiveness." Richard understood he had been tested for weeks, not through words but through actions. James was observing if Richard had truly changed, if he was willing to work hard, to humble himself, to put family above money. "And me?" asked Richard. "Do I deserve forgiveness?" James smiled and put his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Richard, you were forgiven a long time ago, you just didn't know it." 2 weeks later, they signed the contract with Frank and rented a 400-square-meter warehouse in an industrial area of San Diego. The location was perfect, large enough to meet the demand, but not so expensive that it would compromise the company's finances. Richard put all his business experience into structuring the operation. He created quality control systems, efficient workflows, and a training program for the employees they would hire. James took care of team selection. He chose mechanics not just for their technical skills, but for their character. "We can teach skill," he said. "Honesty and dedication are things a person either has or doesn't have." Matthew finalized the development of the application, and they tested it internally with great success. The tool really made a difference in customer service, allowing total transparency for the clients. The opening of the auto shop was an emotional event. Residents of the neighborhood where James lived came to show their support. Old clients from the garage made a point of showing up, and Frank brought some of his suppliers to see the operation. "I never imagined the opening of an auto shop could be so moving," Richard commented to James during the ceremony. "That's because it's not just an auto shop," James replied. "It's the fulfillment of a promise we made to each other when we were kids." Richard remembered the promise. They would work together when they grew up, taking care of people through honest work. It had taken nearly 3 decades, but the promise was being kept. The first months of the new auto shop were challenging but rewarding. The team James had put together was truly exceptional. Every mechanic treated the vehicles with personal care. Every attendant knew the customers by name. Every job was done as if it were for a family member. Frank was so impressed with the quality of the work that he recommended the auto shop to other business owners. Within 6 months, they had a waiting list of customers wanting service. "I think we've discovered the formula for success," Richard said to James one afternoon. "What formula?" "Treating people like people, not like numbers. Doing the work with love, not just for money. Building real relationships." James smiled. "That's not a formula, Richard. It's just the right way to live." Richard was gradually learning this. For years, he had believed that success meant earning more than others, having more things, impressing more people. Now he realized that true success was much simpler: making a positive difference in the lives of the people around him. One day, while they were working together on a regular customer's truck, James made a comment that changed Richard's perspective on everything. "You know what I like most about our work?" "What?" "Every car we fix takes a family somewhere. Every truck we get running right carries food or medicine or important things to thousands of people. We don't just fix machines, we fix the lives of those who depend on them." Richard stopped what he was doing and looked at his brother. He had never thought about the work that way. To him, cars were just products, customers were just sources of revenue. James saw human connections in everything. "James, can I ask you something personal?" "I do." "Do you regret anything in your life?" James thought carefully before answering. "I regret not being firmer with you when you were a teenager." "What do you mean?" I should have insisted more that you not drift away so much. I should have gone after you more often. Maybe if I had been more persistent." "James, it was my fault, not yours." "It's not about fault, Richard. It's about responsibility. I was the older brother, it was my responsibility to take care of you, and I didn't do it right." Richard was surprised by this revelation. "James, you sacrificed everything for me. How can you think you didn't take care of me properly?" "Because taking care isn't just about giving material things. It's also about giving guidance, being there for the important moments, not letting the person lose their way." "But you tried. You wrote letters. You looked for me." "I didn't try hard enough. I accepted your absence too easily. I should have been more stubborn." Richard understood in that moment that James also carried guilt and regrets. He wasn't the perfect man Richard had idealized, but a complex human being who had also made mistakes and learned from them. "You know what we're going to do," said Richard. "We're going to stop carrying guilt for the past. Let's focus on not making the same mistakes from now on." James smiled. "Agreed." They shook hands, sealing not just an agreement about the past, but a commitment to the future. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. As the auto shop grew and became established, Richard faced an important decision. Several tech companies had shown interest in the app that Matthew had developed. They offered significant sums to buy the technology and hire the young man. "It's an amazing opportunity, Matthew," said Richard. "You could make more money in 1 year than many people make in 10. "I know, Uncle. But it's not just about the money. What else is there?" "I'm afraid of making the same mistakes you made, of leaving family behind in pursuit of success." Matthew's brutal honesty hit Richard like a slap in the face, but a necessary one. "Matthew, you don't have to choose between family and success. You can have both if you make the right choices." "How?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Accept the offer, but with one condition, that you remain a partner in our auto shop. Use the money and knowledge you gain to help our company grow too." Matthew looked at his father, who nodded approvingly. "I think your uncle is right, son. You can fly high, but you don't have to forget where you came from." "Unlike what I did," admitted Richard. "I flew so high I forgot I had roots." Matthew accepted the tech company's offer, but negotiated a hybrid work arrangement that allowed him to continue dedicating time to the family auto shop. With the contract money, he invested in expanding the shop and developing new systems. Within a year, Johnson Brothers Auto Shop became a benchmark in San Diego and the surrounding area. They weren't the biggest, but they were recognized for their exceptional quality and personalized service. Richard had paid off all his debts and achieved something worth more than money, a life with purpose. He woke up every day eager to go to work, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be with James and contribute to something meaningful. But life still had surprises in store for them. One day, Frank arrived at the shop with an unexpected proposal. "Have you ever thought about franchising your business model?" "What do you mean?" asked Richard. "I get calls every week from business owners in other cities wanting auto shops with your quality. How about if you created a franchise system?" Richard felt the familiar entrepreneurial excitement, but now tempered with the prudence he had learned from James. "Frank, our strength lies exactly in being small and personal. Franchising could make us lose that. Not necessarily, said Matthew. We can create a model that maintains our values but allows controlled expansion. James listened to the discussion thoughtfully. What do you think? Is it worth it? It depends, said Richard. If it's to make quick money, it's not worth it. But if it's to bring our service model to other communities, help more people, then it might be worth it. They decided to test the idea with a pilot auto shop in Sacramento. Richard used his contacts to find a local mechanic with values similar to those of James, and Matthew developed a training and support system. The Sacramento auto shop was a success from the very first month. The local mechanic, a man named Anthony, had worked for years in large auto shops where he was treated only as an employee. Having his own auto shop with proper support transformed not only his professional life, but his personal one as well. It's as if you've given me a business family, said Anthony during a visit to the headquarters in San Diego. I don't feel alone facing the challenges. Richard and James exchanged glances, understanding they had found something special, a business model based on genuine human values. In 2 years, the Johnson Brothers network had 8 auto shops in towns across New York and Missouri. Each one maintained the original philosophy: personal service, exceptional quality, fair prices, and a close relationship with the community. Richard had become a different man. He now lived in a simple house in the same neighborhood as James, went to work every day by bicycle, and knew all his neighbors by name. His life was incomparably simpler than before, but infinitely richer. One evening, while having dinner at James's house as they did almost every night, Matthew made an important announcement. Dad, Uncle, I have news. I'm getting married. James almost choked on his water. Married? To whom? To Lauren, the young woman from the tech company. We've been dating for 6 months. Richard smiled. Why didn't you bring her to meet us? Because I wanted to be sure first. And now I am. Sure of what? Asked James. That she loves me for who I am, not for what I have. That she won't make me choose between her and the family. Richard felt a pang in his heart. Matthew had learned from his mistakes without having to make them. They met Lauren the following week. She was an intelligent and sensitive engineer who clearly adored Matthew and deeply respected James. When James told some family stories, she listened with genuine interest, without judging their humble origins. Your son is incredible, Mr. Johnson, she said, and now I understand why. He had a father who taught him true values. And an uncle who taught him what not to do, joked Matthew. Everyone laughed, including Richard. He had learned to laugh at his own mistakes, something he had never been able to do before. The wedding was scheduled for the end of the year and would be held at the church in the neighborhood where James lived. Matthew and Lauren wanted something simple, intimate, focused on celebrating the love and union of the families. Richard, James said one morning, I want you to be my best man at Matthew's wedding. Best man? But James, you're the father. I should be the one having a best man. It's a tradition in our family. The younger brother is the best man for the oldest nephew. Richard didn't know if it was a real tradition or if James was making it up, but it didn't matter. It was an honor he didn't deserve, but one he would accept with gratitude. As the wedding approached, Richard found himself planning something special. He wanted to give the couple a gift that represented not only generosity, but an understanding of what truly mattered to them. James, what do you think about giving them a honeymoon trip? Richard, that would be too expensive. Not to Paris or Rome, something simple but special. Remember that inn in the mountains our parents always wanted to visit but never had the chance? James lit up. In Lake Tahoe, they always talked about that? Exactly. We can give them a week there. Simple, beautiful, with family meaning. It was the perfect gift. Matthew and Lauren were touched not just by the generosity, but by the care in choosing something that honored the memory of the grandparents Matthew had never met. The wedding was a true celebration. The small church was packed with friends and neighbors who truly loved the family. Richard, in his speech as best man, talked about second chances and how family is the most precious thing anyone can have. Matthew, said Richard, looking at his nephew, you're starting a family with a foundation I never had. True love, solid values, and a father who taught you the difference between having and being. Don't make my mistakes. Never trade the people you love for things you can buy. After the ceremony, the guests gathered in the church hall for the reception. It was simple but joyful, with live music from a local band, food made by the family's own friends, and plenty of dancing. Richard, who had never been one for dancing, found himself on the dance floor with Mrs. Wilson, James's neighbor, who insisted on teaching him some steps. "Relax, Richard," she said, laughing. "Dancing is like living. If you think too much, you lose the joy." Watching Richard genuinely enjoying himself, James commented to Matthew, "Your uncle finally remembered how to really smile. He's changed a lot since you two reconnected. He hasn't changed, son. He just returned to who he always was deep down." During the party, Richard received an unexpected call. It was from a journalist at the magazine that had interviewed him about Businessmen of the Year years before. "Mr. Johnson, we're doing a story about businessmen who changed their lives. We heard about your story and would like to interview you." Richard looked around the party, James chatting animatedly with the mechanics from the auto shop, Matthew dancing with Lauren, neighbors and customers mingling like one big family. "Thank you for your interest," said Richard, "but I'm not interested in giving interviews at the moment, but it would be great publicity for your new company. Our company grows through good work and word of mouth, not through publicity. Good evening." Richard hung up the phone and returned to the party. James had observed the conversation from afar and approached. "Interview?" It was, "but I'm not interested in that kind of thing anymore." "Why not?" "Because I learned from you that what matters isn't being seen, it's making a difference." The party continued late into the night, and Richard felt part of a community for the first time in decades. When he finally got home, exhausted but happy, he looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man reflected back. He had smile lines that hadn't been there before, hands calloused from honest work, and a sparkle in his eyes that had been missing for years. He was thinner, less polished than before, but infinitely more real. The following Sunday, a tradition that had been established, the brothers had lunch together at the same restaurant where they had reconnected months before. But now they arrived together, talking and laughing, treated with respect by both the staff and other customers. "Richard," said James during lunch, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. The day I found you on the road, it wasn't a coincidence." Richard stopped eating. "What do you mean, as I'd been following you for weeks?" "Following?" Richard was startled. "Not like that," James laughed. "Mrs. Johnson had come to me, told me about her illness and about her husband's regrets. She gave me your address, said you deserved to know the truth about what happened. So you knew where I lived." "I did. I spent several afternoons watching you leave the building, get in your car, go to work. You seemed sad, Richard. Even having everything you ever wanted, you seemed sad." Richard processed this information. "And why didn't you approach me directly?" "Because I was afraid of your reaction. I was afraid you'd reject me again. So I started following your route to New York a few times, hoping for a natural opportunity for us to meet." "And you caused the problem with my car?" James lowered his eyes, embarrassed. "The radiator already had a small leak. I just sped up the process a little. I'm sorry about that." Richard started laughing. "James, you sabotaged my car. I'm sorry. I was desperate to talk to you, but didn't know how—" "It's all right," said Richard, still laughing. "Actually, it was brilliant. If you had approached me in New York, I probably would have run away anyway." "That's exactly what I thought." Richard looked at his brother with renewed admiration. James hadn't just forgiven his mistakes, but had found a creative and careful way to reconnect with him. It was strategy, but strategy driven by love, not self-interest. "James, can I make one more confession?" "Go ahead." "All these months, I keep wondering if I deserve this second chance you gave me." "And have you reached any conclusion?" "I have. I don't deserve it. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." James reached his hand across the table. "Richard, you already deserve it. Just by being here, just by choosing to come back, you already deserve it." They shook hands again, but this time the gesture had a different meaning. It wasn't just forgiveness or reconciliation. It was mutual recognition that they had found something rare, a second chance to build what they should always have had. Months later, Richard made a decision that surprised everyone. He sold his shares in the tech company that was recovering value and used the money to create a support fund for small business owners. "Have you gone crazy?" asked Charles, the accountant. "That company is worth millions now." "I know," said Richard calmly, "but money sitting around is good for nothing. I want to use that value to help people like James and I were helped." The fund became an impressive reality. Richard and James traveled through rural areas identifying small businesses with potential, offering not just money, but mentorship and ongoing support. It was as if they were planting seeds of opportunity in communities that rarely receive this kind of attention. "It's interesting," commented James during one of these trips. "You're using everything you learned in the business world to help simple folks like us." "It's what I should have always done," replied Richard. "Use my privileges to lift up other people, not just myself." On one of these trips, they met Mary, a 55-year-old widow who ran a small bakery alone in a rural Missouri town. She was about to close the business because she couldn't compete with a bakery chain that had come to town. "My bakery has always been the heart of this town," Mary told them with tears in her eyes. "People came here not just to buy bread, but to chat, to catch up on news, to feel welcomed. But now," encouraged James, "now everyone goes to the chain because it's cheaper. And I understand, right? With times being hard, every penny counts." Richard and James exchanged glances. They knew that struggle well, competing with big companies that had resources to offer lower prices. "Mary," said Richard, "what if we helped you modernize your bakery without losing its essence?" "How do you mean?" "Improve equipment so you can lower costs and be competitive on price, but maintaining the personal service that is their trademark." Mary accepted the help, and in 3 months her bakery was transformed. New efficient ovens, a modern management system, but the same caring service as always. Sales not only recovered, but increased. "You saved not just my bakery," said Mary on reopening day, "but you saved the heart of our town." Richard understood that day that he had found his true calling. It wasn't to be the richest businessman, but to use his skills to strengthen communities and preserve what was human in business relationships. As time passed, the network of auto shops and the support fund grew naturally. Richard and James developed a reputation as different kinds of businessmen. They were successful, but never lost focus on the human aspect of business. One day, Richard received a phone call that deeply moved him. It was from a journalist, but this time about a personal matter. "Mr. Johnson, we're from American Family magazine and would like to do a story about brothers who overcame differences. Your story with your brother James was recommended by several businessmen who work with you." Richard hesitated. "What kind of story?" "We want to show that it's possible to have business success without losing family values. Your story is inspiring. I need to talk to my brother first." James was initially embarrassed by the idea. "Richard, I'm not sure I want our personal life exposed like that." "I had doubts too," admitted Richard. "But I thought, if our story can help other families avoid making the same mistakes we made, in that case it's worth it," agreed James. The story was published 2 months later and had unexpected impact. Hundreds of people wrote to the magazine sharing similar stories of families separated by ambition or misunderstandings. Richard and James began receiving invitations to speak about family reconciliation and business values. Initially hesitant, they ended up accepting some invitations when they realized they could truly make a difference in people's lives. "I never imagined our story could help so many people," commented Richard after a speech in New York, where several people were moved by their account. "It's because it's a true story," said James. "People can feel when something is genuine." During one of these speeches, something happened that deeply marked Richard. A man about 40 years old approached after their presentation. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for sharing your story. I have a brother I haven't seen in 15 years. We fought over inheritance and never spoke again. Tomorrow I'm going to look for him." 6 months later, Richard received a letter from that man saying he had reconciled with his brother and they now worked together in a small business. "You saved my family," he wrote. "See," said James when Richard shared the letter. "Sometimes we don't know the good we're doing." Richard kept that letter in a special folder. It was the beginning of a collection of stories from people who had been inspired by his reconciliation with James to repair their own family relationships. Over the years, Richard and James became references not only in business but in family relations. Their auto shops prospered, the support fund helped hundreds of small entrepreneurs, and they built lives rich in meaningful relationships. Richard never became a millionaire again in the traditional sense, but he considered himself the richest man in the world. He had family, he had purpose, he had the satisfaction of making a positive difference in people's lives. One afternoon, 5 years after their reunion on the highway, the two brothers were sitting on James's porch, watching Matthew play in the yard with his newborn daughter, Anna. "Richard," said James, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything?" Richard thought carefully. "I regret the lost years. I regret believing that individual success was more important than family. I regret being so proud that I almost lost you forever." "And if you could go back in time, would you do things differently?" "I would. But at the same time, if things had been different, maybe we never would have learned the lessons we learned. Maybe we never would have developed this gratitude for having each other." James nodded wisely. "Sometimes the hardest path is the one that teaches us the most." "James, can I ask you the same thing? Do you regret anything?" "I regret not being more persistent in looking for you. But I also understand that maybe you weren't ready to listen to me before." "I really wasn't. Then everything happened at the right time." Richard looked at his granddaughter playing in the backyard and thought about the future. Anna would grow up knowing the story of her great-uncles, knowing from a young age that family was the most precious thing in the world. She would never go through the confusion that Richard had gone through. "James, thank you." "For what?" "For never giving up on me. For forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. For teaching me the difference between having success and being successful." James smiled, looking at the granddaughter, who was now chasing a butterfly in the garden. "Richard, life is too short to hold grudges and too long to live alone. We found each other again because it was meant to be. Do you think our parents would be proud?" "I'm sure. They always wanted us to be united. It took time, but we got there." At that moment, with the sun setting over San Diego and the family gathered in James's simple backyard, Richard felt a peace he had never experienced before. He no longer had the yellow Corvette of his dreams. Now he drove a simple pickup truck that he used for work. He no longer had the luxury apartment. He lived in a 3-bedroom house just like any other middle-class worker. But he had something that money could never buy, a family that loved him unconditionally, a job he did with purpose, and the certainty that he was living according to his true values. "James," said Richard, watching Anna take her first hesitant steps in the yard, "what is it? This little girl will never go through what we went through." "How can you be sure?" "Because she will grow up knowing that family always comes first. She will learn from a young age that success without love is failure in disguise." James smiled, picking up Anna when she stumbled. "And she will learn that no matter how far life takes us, there will always be a place to come back to, and people waiting with open arms." Richard looked at his brother holding his granddaughter and understood that he had witnessed something miraculous, the transformation of two lives through forgiveness, honest work, and genuine brotherly love. That night, as he said goodbye at the door of James's house, Richard received a tight hug from his brother. "Richard, thank you for coming back. Thank you for waiting. I will always wait for you, little brother. Always." Richard walked to his house a few streets away, looking at the stars in the clear San Diego sky. In his mind, James's voice echoed, calling him little brother with the same affection as when they were children. The yellow Corvette had been sold years ago, but Richard had gained something much more valuable. He had regained his family and discovered that true success wasn't about reaching the top alone, but about lifting up the people we love along with us. In his desk drawer, he still kept that worn photo of the two of them as children, hugging in the backyard of the house where they grew up. Sometimes he looked at it and wondered if those boys could have imagined the journey that awaited them, the years of separation, the empty individual success, the providential reunion, and the rebuilding of everything that truly mattered. They probably couldn't have imagined it, but they certainly would recognize the story's ending. Two brothers united once more, stronger and wiser from the hardships they faced, ready to confront any future challenges, because now they would face them together. In the auto shop, a simple plaque hanging on the wall summarized everything they had learned. Family is the greatest treasure. Honest work is the highest honor. Second chances are gifts we must cherish. And every morning, when they arrived for work, Richard and James would read that plaque and remember how they got there. Through a broken yellow Corvette, an offer to fix it in exchange for lunch, and the transformative power of brotherly love that withstands time, distance, and pride. End of story. So what did you think of this story of reunion and forgiveness? Tell us in the comments if you believe Richard made the right decision by abandoning a life of luxury for his family. Have you ever experienced a similar situation or know someone who had to choose between success and family? Share your experience with us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.